So I'm April Jones. I am the president and CEO of Jones Law Firm PC. I've been an attorney for 30 years, and Jones Law Firm has been serving Colorado clients for 20 years. So this is 2021. So we're in our 21st year. We love what we do. We do family law exclusively. So we are your go-to firm for family law. So that's child custody, child support, divorce, parental, grandparent rights, all sorts of things like that. Today, though, our topic is on gray divorce. So we've got 30 minutes to go over some really important things. And you might say, what is gray divorce? And gray divorce is divorce for people over 50. That's kind of the new term for people facing divorce, looking at divorce when they're over 50 years old. And it does present challenges that you don't have in newer marriages, because the presumption with the gray divorce and the age is not that you're 50 and you've been married 1 year, it's that you're 50 and you've been married 25 years or 30 years. And so what does that look like? And what does that feel like? We are seeing a lot of movement in gray divorce post-pandemic. And one statistic that we've come across is that Colorado is like a leading state in gray divorce. I don't know why. Why more than any other state? We've got a beautiful state. I don't know why Colorado has that is a leading indicator. But what I do know is that means there are a lot of people who have questions and a lot of people who need support. And that's why we've started this series on gray divorce, literally because of the need in our state. So let's get after it. Let's talk about it. Go ahead, put questions that you have in the chat. I already have some questions that we're going to cover because there are some of the most frequently asked questions. And one thing I want to talk about is a question I have is how do you build your divorce team, and why do you need a divorce team if you're getting divorced and you've been married 25 years, 30 years? The thing about the long-term marriage is there's so much more potentially to fight about. There's so much more to divide. The ripping of a marriage that's been growing for so long is a bigger deal potentially. It certainly feels like more for a lot of people. And I'm going to generalize here, but definitely jump in the chat and ask questions that you have specifically. So what happens in a divorce in Colorado is all assets acquired during marriage are marital. Doesn't matter how they're titled, unless it was inheritance or gift that led to the ownership. But if you own a property that you acquired during your marriage and you purchased it with marital funds, it doesn't matter how it was titled if it's just in one person's name, right? So let's just assume for this conversation that you didn't get inheritance during the marriage and you did not get gifts, large gifts from other people. So then everything you own would be marital. And that could be a lot. That could be a lot of things. I had one couple we were talking to earlier, they have 15 houses, and dividing 15 houses is more to divide than, if you're a young couple and all you've ever done is rent an apartment month to month, and the contract, you can just terminate it and be done and kind of walk away, right? So it can be very complicated. You've got retirement. All your retirement that was acquired during marriage is going to be treated as marital. So just because you're the person that's got a lot of policemen, firemen type clients or families over the years, and if you just think the fireman is the person who's rushing into the fire, he comes to me and he's like, I should get to keep my retirement because I'm the one rushing into the fire, risking life and limb and being a hero. And while all those things are true, the retirement that you build up is marital. So half the retirement, assuming that everything's equal in your marriage and we don't have some sort of unique circumstances for this hypothetical, generally speaking, half the retirement belongs to the other spouse. So you're dividing retirements. If you've been married 50, 60, 70 years, you could have built up a really large savings, a really large 401k, a really large pension, and it's all marital and it needs to be divided. So by the time you look at dividing a complex financial relationship, it can feel very weighty and heavy. And that's where you would start to have a team, because you can need someone to handle your finances in terms of your real estate, your finances in terms of your monies and how they're held. If you think about it, anything that can be built and owned is up for being divided in a divorce. So the more you've built, the more you've earned, the more you've earned, and the more you've owned, the more there is to divide. Now, there's the interesting component that in a lot of marriages that are 50, 60, 70, children are all grown. So you're not worrying about children issues the way you would if you were in your 20s, or your children are in high school, or your children are in college. And those are all very different phases. If your children are in high school, you've got to deal with the whole custody battle of, maybe not battle, maybe the 16-year-old's like, I want to be with mom. No, I want to be with dad, right? So you get those kind of hard edges in teenagers that you have to manage. So you've got children's issues. If your children are in high school but approaching and going through college, where you can have 2 in college, 1 in high school, that affects finances as well, because who is going to pay for college? And that's one of the questions on here is, what about college? Well, the thing is, in Colorado, the court can't order post-secondary education. That's a problem when you have a collection of children that are either heading towards college or in college. And what do you do with that? And how does that affect the leverage in your divorce? I have to tell you, that is a huge leverage piece in divorces all the time. So if you are in a situation where you've got children heading towards college or in college, we should really talk specifically about your situation and what's the best way to try to manage at this time in your life. So we've got finance issues. We have children in a situation where they're older and they're going to be having a huge say in who they want to live with and what kind of parenting schedule they want. And then you have children in college, and how do you pay for that? So that's a very unique component of a gray divorce as well. Or when your children are all out of the house and you don't have children in college. The statistics show, and you should Google this because we meet with experts a lot for one reason or the other, a divorce for older children, you would think that they'd be fine. Statistics show that it can be pretty traumatic for adult children in situations where their parents have been solidly married their whole life, and now you break the foundations of what they've come to believe. So you also need to be concerned, just be aware that they may need to have some support. They may need to have some counseling. So you've got a mental health component for yourself and for your family to look at. So now for our team, we've got finance team, we're dealing with children. And then now we're looking at the health and well-being of yourself and of your family. Because if you do this without thinking it through, you can end up in a situation where you have divided your adult children or your semi-adult children for decades, right? And the point wouldn't be to create a worse situation for yourself or destroy your family in ways that you don't have to, if you can be thoughtful about it. So the point here is to be thoughtful and strategic by looking at the various components that are present and then building a team to help you manage how to best move your family forward in your unique situation. And sometimes people get into a counseling situation with their spouse or soon-to-be ex, and sometimes they change their mind because they figure out ways to manage their big giant ship rather than stalling it out and divorcing. So that happens as well. The way we see it at Jones Law Firm, we want what's best for our client. And we want you to have enough information to determine this is what works for me and for my family. So if your intention is to move forward with the separation and the dissolution of your long-term marriage, let's talk about it ahead of time. Let's look at what team members we can put together so that you can go through this process as smoothly as you can to get you to the next best times of your life. That would be the goal. Second question I have here, what documents do you need before meeting with an attorney? Well, in a gray divorce, you probably, I'm generalizing here, you can have more documents than if you were newly married because you've been acquiring documents for a lot longer. So we need financial documents, we need taxes, pay stubs, bank statements, retirement statements. If you have multiple pieces of property, real estate, we're going to need to know that. Multiple cars, we'll need to know that. We'll need to have blue book values. There's so many things that we need to put together in order to move you through the process smoothly. We actually have a checklist. So we're at denverdivorceattorneys.com. You can email us and we can send you the checklist of things you need to know and what you should have ahead of time. Now, you don't have to have filled out the forms ahead of time. I know sometimes people see the long list of documents that are required for dissolution and they can really get, pretty anxious about it. But it's important to know where the information is in your home. And if you're going to move out and you leave all the information in the house, once you've separated out of the house and now you and your ex are at odds, it can be complicated to get the documents that otherwise would be readily available to you because you knew right where they were in your home. So you don't want to be in a situation where you separate and you haven't gathered the documents that you need, or you haven't made sure that you have access to the websites where you can log in and get the documentation you need. These days, so much information, your retirement, your bank accounts, so many things are online. The problem you get into sometimes, though, is if you get requests for multiple bank statements, because we do something called discovery, where we can ask for the last 24 months of statements or the last 36 months of statements, or we could even just want the most recent couple of statements. So if you are a person who has saved your statements, then it's easier for you to be able to access them if you haven't left them in your home. Otherwise, you have to order them, which can obviously be done. And for people these days who are more modern and streamlined and not gathering paper, and they shred their statements or never got their statements in the first place, you'll be in a situation where you're getting your statements online. So there's so much that can be done these days electronically that you're in a better position than you were, back when we started the firm and we were putting out yellow page ads, people were coming in with big boxes, and now, people log into their password and they email us attachments. So a lot of that can be taken care of that way, but some things can't be, right? So again, get a copy of the checklist and we can get you that so that you can make wise decisions as you're trying to decide your next best move. One thing that is unique to a great divorce is the amount of thought that people have to go through because of the way it changes your life potentially. Even if your family is, if you've been financially successful, you're still looking at half of that. Even if you've earned a lot of money, you could be looking at paying a lot of money in alimony, right? On the other hand, if your family's earned a lot of money, but you're going to get alimony, you're only getting alimony instead of having access to all of the money in your bank account. So it's a lot to think about in terms of, is this the next best move for me? And we are happy to, talk with you and kind of talk you through that. If those are questions that you have, if you're not decided and you want to know, what might my life look like? Because it's a big deal. If you're 60 you could live 30, 40 more years. And what do you want that to look like financially? What do you want that to look like emotionally? What do you want it to look like for your family? So that's the decision that you obviously have to make at this stage. But we are here to give you advice and support from the angle of what does this look like for me legally if this is the direction that I move in. I'm looking at another question here. How to take control of your finances in divorce. Well, that's a little broad because, like I said, if assets earned during marriage or marital, even if you've got separate property, which would be something you got, for example, by inheritance, or you had the money prior to marriage 30 years ago, and you bought something and kept it just in your name the whole time. Let's say you bought some real estate 10 years into the marriage with money that you had prior to marriage. So, and put it only in your name, you didn't mix the money, and it's still your separate property. The thing is, the increase in value is marital. So if you bought it 30 years ago and it's increased in value, the 30 years of increase is what gets divided between the spouses. So there's a lot of rules here, and it's important that you kind of know the rules because this is such a big move and play that you should know the rules, or at least be in connection and relationship with someone who's experienced, who does know the rules, and we can just really help walk you through it. That's really important to me. The education or the support. And even though we're not trying to teach you how to, build a divorce, we can still ask you questions. Well, what do you feel? What do you want this to look like? What do you want your life to look like? What's a priority to you? Is college a priority? Is it not a priority? What's a priority to your ex? Like, we can walk through the social and emotional parts and components of the divorce to get to what you actually want and how to move forward legally using legalese for you. So that taking control of your finances, part of it is recognizing you can't go and just take all the finances and put them in one account and keep all the money. So, that would be like the big broad take control, right? It's a more of a nuanced question, like, what do you need to live on and how do we get that for you? Or how do we keep you from having to pay more than you can feel you can afford to pay? Or how do we keep you in the house that's the most important to you and not have it sold and have you having to, live somewhere else? Perhaps you have a business together and you want to continue to own and control the business. How do we do that? Opposite of that is maybe you have a business, you just want to get paid from the business. You don't want to control it at all. How do we do that? So the answer of how to get control of your finances really varies from client to client. And that's what we do best. We tailor our advice and our comments and our thoughts to our specific clients. What I'm giving you now is this broad brush because it is so broad, but you're not broad, you're specific. And if you want to talk about specifically you and where you fit in, we would love to do that. We're divorceattorneys.com. So please respond. Reach out to us and we can definitely, move you forward in that area. Strategies to plan for your future. Well, that's kind of what we've been talking about a lot already in this webinar, is thinking through what it is you want. Look at what you have, look at what you want, where you want to go, and then what moves do you make to get there? One of the comments I made earlier is that when you have children in college, approaching college or still in college, that's one of the times where I see people the most exposed in gray divorces because of the fact that you get this imbalance a lot where let's just use mom and dad. Let's just be general. So let's say mom has been a stay-at-home mom, dad's been the breadwinner, been the person to go out and bring money home when moms run the house and made everything go, right? I've gone real generic and real general because, obviously there's a mix in relationships, but for this exaggeration purposes, here it is, college. There was always a plan to have the children go to whatever college they want to. And now they're getting divorced. And the dad says, I cannot, and I see this so often. Dad says, I can't afford to pay for colleges for our 3 wonderful children and pay you alimony. And that's when I see the moms cave. Because look, we put the children first. We want them to have everything they need. And so there's this willingness to take less alimony because they can't be forced to pay for college, but they can be, the court would insist on alimony, but the court cannot order college. So that's where I see a lot of women end up kind of at a loss. Once the children have graduated, they've agreed to this low alimony. And so now they've got their next 15, 20 years in a situation where they're getting much less than they were entitled to because they were looking out for their children. Now, when that same woman comes in, the day the last child graduates from college, it's just a pure alimony case. There's not that leverage to offset it against. And that I see her get paid a lot more and get what she's entitled to in this hypothetical, because the children aren't there to be used as leverage. So that is unique, I think, to gray divorce. You get children used as leverage, unfortunately, all the time when they're younger, but you don't, it's the custody component of it. It's not college. So there's just so many pieces to dissolving relationship, and it changes as the marriage gets older and the family gets older and the children get older. So there's a lot to talk about. I want to take some of your questions. How do we handle an inheritance? So an inheritance would be separate property. Separate property remains a separate property of the acquiring spouse. We see this a lot in long-term marriages because the longer you're married, the older your parents get, and people, they lose their parents over time. So let's say one spouse's parents died, 10 years into the marriage and he inherited. One spouse's parents died, right before the divorce and they've inherited. Where does inheritance fit in? Well, the separate property, it's separate property. So it remains your separate property as long as you don't commingle it. You don't go and put the other spouse's name on it. We see that a lot where you're in the middle of your marriage, you inherit your mother's house, you sell it and then put it in the bank, in the family bank account to just sit there and earn money or to buy another house. But now with both parties' names on it, you've commingled that property. So when you go to get divorced and say it was your separate property, it's no longer separate if you've treated it the way I just described. Now, if you inherited a house, sold your mother's house, put it in a bank account just in your name, and then left it there, that would be separate property. The increase in value would be marital. If you put it in a piece of real estate and you purchase the real estate, but only in your name, that remains separate property. The increase would be marital. So the answer for inheritance is it would remain your separate property as long as you keep it separate. The increase is what's marital. In my hypothetical, where one spouse just inherited right before the divorce, we can presume that there has not been an opportunity for the increase in value. So it would just be all their separate property without having to address it any more than saying you inherited it yesterday, it's yours. So that is how inheritance is treated. How will my retirement be affected? Retirement is typically a marital property. If it's retirement that you acquired prior to marriage, 30 years ago, then that portion would be separate property. You would then look at how much, what let's say you have a 401k, we would pull statements to see what the value of the 401k was date of marriage. Now that's hard if you've been married 30, 40, 50 years and your 401k has transferred hands and you have to track it down, but that's what we do. We track it down. And then we look at the value of the retirement today. The difference would be that first, the statement that shows the value as of the date of marriage, that we would then say is your separate property, and you get to pull that out. The rest would be marital. So retirement is affected in a pretty basic way, in that for the most part, it's joint, and you're going to need to divide it. And if one person hasn't worked as much and they have a small retirement and the other one has a gigantic retirement, you put it in one big pot and divide it. You don't literally take a 401k and max with the pension, but in terms of the value, you divide each one, and it ultimately is more or less half. So that is how retirement gets treated for the most part, generally speaking, in a great divorce. Obviously, your situation is unique to you, and military pensions and teacher pensions and pensions when you work on the railroad versus 401k versus options. They all will be, we need to look at them and handle them unique to them. But at the end of the day, the intention is still to divide it to both parties equally. So no matter how you slice it, that's kind of where the answer ends up, even though the methodology will vary depending on the type of retirement. So that's as much as we're able to cover today. If you have specific questions, which I know you will, because this is some really unique stuff, please just give us a call and we can go over that with you. And I'm just happy that we have this dialogue going now. We're going to be presenting on great divorce more often. So send your questions in. If you're something that you're just thinking about, we can make sure we take your questions in our webinars in the future. So again, I'm April Jones. I am happy, just honored to be able to spend some time with you this afternoon to just really try to work through some of these issues with great divorce. We do have resources. We have resources for therapists, resources for financial advisors and planners, experts in parental alienation, if you're worried about that. So we have people and resources we can also connect you to if you're at this stage of thinking about the process. So take care. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.